This episode of Fargo Talks Fargo is brought to you by Cora. Focus, practice, sleep, repeat. Cora is the best app for elevating your mindful practice and is an all-encompassing solution for fostering mental awareness, improving focus, and promoting restful sleep, making it an invaluable tool for holistic well-being. Visit Cora.co, that's Kaura.co, for more information. And now, to Fargo Talks Fargo. Welcome to Fargo Talks Fargo, a podcast on the FX television series Fargo. I'm Bill, and I am back again with my buddy Charpie to talk about something special. Charpie, what's up?
Yeah, it's a postseason bonus show. My favorites.
We always tend to go musical at the end of our show openers. Maybe it's just that we've developed our own musical sensibility between our relationship.
Yeah. Well, this week, Jeff Russo returns for his third appearance on Fargo Talks Fargo, and he's got some good stuff for you, I'm sure.
Yeah, we usually don't kind of record these intros to our stuff, but we just wanted to make sure we were real conscious and got all the meaty stuff in our interview with Jeff. But I will say this, I've been kind of missing you, Charpie.
Oh, yeah? That's so nice, Bill.
This is our mini hot dish before the actual entree of Jeff. No, this is fantastic. We were able to do this, and thanks again to all the listeners who've been dropping us a few other notes. We, shortly after Charpie and I recorded the last episode about season 5, episode 10, I got like horribly ill with influenza, and then I've been traveling and stuff. But we look forward to bringing you this special episode. As always, stay tuned into this. We might have another one of these coming up. You never know. Sometimes people answer our emails and set us up with stuff. So
tasty treats.
Yeah. Oh, Charpie, we'll talk about it later, but I got a recipe for chili with Bisquick, so I feel like we should maybe make it and do a special hot dish episode that maybe we'll put on social somewhere for people to.
Yeah, we'll film video.
We'll do our own we'll do our own tasting table. But without further ado, we'll toss you into an interview with Jeff Russo, composer for the television series Fargo. Well, here we are. Jeff, thank you so much, Jeff Russo, for joining us on Fargo Talks Fargo, the 10-year podcast Charpie and I started that we never thought would last 10 years.
It's true.
And you were very gracious in season 1 to visit with us. And here you are back in season 5. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for having me. It's, every 10, we should do this once every 10 years, probably.
Yeah.
Some of our listeners will know that there was an appearance by you in season 2 as well, when we were in a long conversation with Maggie, and I feel like she somehow digitally accosted you and had us like add you to that conversation as well.
It's very possible.
That was back in December of 2015. So yep, it's been quite a ride though.
Yeah, it has been. It's been an interesting set of, stories, and the fact that we continue to tell these stories is really pretty amazing.
Thanks for spending your time with us today. I don't know how you have any time since we last talked. You've done like 1,000 projects. I mean, season 5 just ended for us on Fargo Talks Fargo, but work has definitely not ended for you. You've been busy with shows like For All Mankind. You had Love and Death come out last year, Star Trek, Snowfall, Man Who Fell to Earth. I mean, the list goes on and on. There's like 24 shows here you've worked on since we've last talked. I don't know, like, how do you find the time to work on these?
It's all about time management, right? It's all about having to figure out like how I can put my time to the best use. And I always find that the best use of my time is to sit and write music. And, there's a lot of stuff that I can delegate to assistants and editors and stuff, which makes my time, gives me the ability to focus only on what I consider to be the most important thing, which is writing the music and figuring out where it's going to go to picture. So that's how I'm able to to have the time. It's like just being able to figure out what the best use of my time is going to be. That's the way I do it.
A lot of professionals don't end up watching their own like final work. Like actors don't watch their movies or their TV shows. And how is that for you? Do you end up going back and seeing everything like in its final form?
Not every time, not every project.
Sure.
I would say sometimes I don't have time to do that. Sometimes I'm just like, I don't need to see that again. Because that's definitely, I'm going to turn off the Yeah, it just gets old. I get over it. Like once
totally.
But sometimes I do. And, I watched all of season 5. live on the air. Oh my God.
Oh, you did? Was that the first time you've ever done that?
Yeah, no. This isn't the first time. I've done that with every season of Fargo, that's for sure. I do that with certain shows that I want to say that I'm really truly invested in sharing that with my family, right?
Mm.
And I will sit and watch with the family. And because I really enjoy getting the feedback that way, because they don't see it at all as I'm working. So I did that with Fargo. I did that with Legion. I've done it with Umbrella Academy. I did it with The Man Who Fell to Earth. It really, ones that I can get the interest from my family to watch, I do. But certain projects that I work on, they're not interested in watching because it's just not the thing that they would watch. And I don't always work on stuff that is something that I would watch, Sometimes it's just about the story that I'm interested in telling, not about the story that I'm interested in watching. A lot of times, the kinds of stories that I like to watch, like I would never write the music for, because it's just not, maybe it's just not the type of music that I do, or not the thing that I'm that good at.
That's interesting. I did want to ask about that because you've done work that kind of, spans a whole spectrum of different genres, but woven throughout that is a lot of science fiction, right? With Star Trek, Picard, Altered Carbon, Legion, For All Mankind. And I was wondering, are you attracted to that type of genre, or did that just happen? Or has it pulled you into that genre?
Well, it's really funny. What is science fiction? You have to ask yourself that question. What is it? In my mind, it's just drama, right? It's just drama set on a science fiction background, right? It's not comedy. I mean, sometimes it is. There have been science fiction comedies, but again, that's just a comedy. And then it's, so I do like science fiction, but I like drama. I like, I don't like melodrama, which I always try to not do. So if you think about what's the difference between, say, Umbrella Academy and Star Trek. Umbrella Academy is not necessarily set in the backdrop of science fiction, but more sort of heightened reality superpower thing. Yeah. I don't know that I consider that to be science fiction, but it's still just a drama, a family drama, and science fiction is just a drama that could as easily be set on a ship in 1895, right? Just a boat, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So what I really enjoy doing is telling emotional stories that have emotional connectivity. And I like to play into that. I like to play into character interaction, and I like to play relationships, and between relationships between characters. That's the stuff that's really interesting to me. How do characters interact? How do they react under certain circumstances? It's what I love about Fargo. Noah's writing on Fargo is so detailed and so nuanced. And yet also, yes, there's this absurdity to it, but that absurdity still feels like, oh, the reason why I think this is funny is because this could be true. That's what makes it funny to me. And, those are the things that I really love to do. So yes, there's a lot of science fiction intertwined in that, but there's a lot of science fiction because that is a very effective way to tell an emotional story and appeal to an audience that likes that sort of futuristic type thing.
Absolutely. When you're working on projects and you're talking about emotional stories, have there ever been any stories that really grabbed you that almost made work difficult in a way, or more emotional in a way for you personally?
Yeah, The Act.
Okay.
So that story was hard to watch because the way the character was treated, it just was difficult. And knowing it was a true story, like an actual true story, not like Fargo true story.
Yeah.
But not a could have been true, but this actually happened to this person. That made it difficult to watch. That made it, sometimes I would turn off my screen and just write the music and then hope and pray that it worked, and it did. And yeah, so that has happened.
Yeah, and I think with this season of Fargo, episode 7, I believe it was, Linda had that impact on a lot of people as well, just because of the domestic abuse kind of side of that story. I think that was very difficult for people. It was one of my favorite and most hard-hitting episodes for me with the marionettes. And
yeah. 7, 8, and 9. So the episode 7, 8, 9, with 10 being the, being the sort of emotional release of the show. 7, 8, and 9 were when it became its most heightened in tension, its most heightened in really hard part of the story.
Sure.
And I agree with that. To me, although I love episode 7, it's episode 8 that I really sort of was like, oh, this is when the story gets really hard. Because episode 7 was told on the backdrop of a fever dream, right? And so you get the idea that this is the stuff that's happening inside. This is the emotions that are all sort of leaking to the surface in her. But in 8, what you see is her reality. And to me, the moment when John Hamm gets out of the car and walks and we play our version of Toxic, and yes, I fashioned the version of that song in a very deeply emotional way, not in a catchy way. It's a very catchy tune, obviously, because I knew that we were telling his story. At the time of doing that piece, I didn't know, and I don't think Noah did either, that was where we were going to use it.
Let's talk about that since you brought it up. So you've done quite a few, a handful of collaborations on the soundtrack of Fargo. This was your second time, I believe, working with Lisa Hannigan, right? The first being with Danny Boy.
So for Fargo, yes, but I worked with Lisa on other things. We did Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds for the movie. But yes, Danny Boy was less of a collaboration and more of a, hey, Lisa, can you just sing a version of Danny Boy and send it to us?
Okay.
Because really, it was just like, and then I just put the note on it. You know what I mean? Like all I had to do was a single note. That was all it needed.
Almost like that whistling portion you said in season 1 when we talked to you about Noah just sent you an iPhone of him whistling and you ended up having to put that whole ukulele bit to it. Was it kind of, that's a completely different kind of thing.
Yeah. Knowing how emotive that was going to need to be, both Noah and I were like, well, we got to call Lisa. You know what I mean? Like we knew we wanted that song. Noah knew he wanted that song.
Okay.
And I was like, oh, wouldn't it be great if I did this kind of version of it and we'll call Lisa and get her to sing. It'll be really evocative. And he was like, yeah, that's exactly what we should do. And that's what we did.
Oh, great. We got the origin story. That's what I was after.
I was going to say too, real quick, just as for the people, I do encourage anybody to go back and listen to our interview from season 1, because there's some fun ground that we cover there. Because another thing that I think will tie into any of our future character or comments is, I was curious from season 1 to now, just to backtrack one quick second, is that in season 1, when we spoke to you, you talked about how early Noah was able to kind of started enticing you into these characters. And I remember you saying something like you had 2-3 months ahead of it where he was giving you just like nuggets of stuff. Has it been typically like that for you through the last additional 4 seasons where you've had a lot of time and some character development? And I feel like you get a peek before some people even do about what's up in Noah's noggin.
Yeah, I think so. I might be the first creative that he sends stuff to, because he sends me scripts and I start sketching ideas for thematic material. And he sends me playlists of songs and he sends me vibe, like what he's thinking of. And then I start writing the process. Yeah. I mean, I was working on season 5 for about 18 months.
Wow. Really?
Yeah. And that's what it takes. It's like he sends me the first script. I read it and I start thinking about what the music is going to be.
Aside from like maybe your like long running relationship with your band Tonic, do you, and a lot of people, some people may not know, Noah is a musician himself and was in a band in his past. Do you think that some of the collaborative things that work for you too, because you're both kind of musically minded? Does that like really help you too in having a language as well?
I mean, I definitely think like he speaks the language, right? So that makes it a little easier. And I feel like he has a trust in me that I'm very fortunate to have. We sort of see eye to eye on how music is used in storytelling, you know? And yeah, I kind of feel like we're in a band. And by the way, we made a record together of all covers from Legion where he sang all the covers and we put all those covers in Legion, you know, and we did one in season 1 also, and we also did one in season 3. We did
Go to Sleep.
The World, well, Go to Sleep Little Baby was in season 1. And in season 3, we did the World Party song at the end of episode 6. I think it was the end of episode 6 or 5. You know, so we collaborate on music. Like we keep saying, hey, let's make some music. We're doing another project now. And, you know, I keep saying, like, when are you going to be in LA? Because he doesn't live in LA.
Is he still in Austin?
He lives, he still spends all of his time there. And, you know, we keep saying, like, hey, when are we gonna make another record?
Jam.
Yeah.
Are there people you've worked with where prior to working with them, you were kind of awestruck or maybe intimidated by, or maybe a fan of, that you were nervous about or anything like that?
Yeah, of course. Steve Zaillian. I did The Night Of, which was his show.
Amazing.
I love that. Riz Ahmed in that show is just,
yeah. I mean, that show is incredible. And we just finished another project that's coming out in April. And it's as incredible. I mean, his ability to see the story and to fashion it, because he directs all the episodes. He wrote all the episodes. He does. And that, I've been working on that one for over 2 years. You know, yeah. And it was one of those things where it was like, oh, okay, I'll be able to finish that before I even have to start Fargo. And that, of course, didn't happen. Like, it all just mashed up on top of one another. I mean, the pandemic didn't help any of this stuff, but
no.
But I would say Steve. My relationship with Noah began at the beginning of my career, this part of my career. And I think kind of at the beginning of his, you know, was his first show that he had done when he hired me. His first show that was his, that he created and was a showrunner. So I kind of feel like our collaborative effort sort of grew with each other, you know, whereas
Absolutely.
Steve, you know, he made movies and directed movies, and, you know, he actually directed one of my favorite movies of all time, which is Searching for Bobby Fischer. And in knowing that he did that and worked with James Horner as his main composer, I was like, oh, well, it's hard for me to step into those shoes for you. But I would say he's the one. I was awestruck first time I met him. I'm always thinking, like, when's he going to fire me? You know, like,
oh,
when?
Gosh.
Well, you have your own set of credentials, Jeff.
Oh.
Thanks to you, Fargo is the most nominated show for the Primetime Emmy Award for Outstanding Music Composition.
Oh, well, that's interesting.
Which is incredible. Yeah,
I've been nominated 4 times. 4 times. Maybe I'll keep the streak going. Like, who knows? Like, I don't know. I would be just as happy if it didn't happen. Like, I'm very proud of this season. It's interesting. You know, I never want to say, like, this is my favorite season, but 2 was always my favorite. Season 2 seemed like everybody was just operating on full capacity. Everybody, all 12 cylinders rolling. 3 was great, obviously. 4 was, I think underappreciated. Because of when it came out, and there was a lot of reasons. But after I watched this season, I'm like, oh, I think maybe we've topped ourselves in terms of how good we can be on all levels. The acting, the writing, the directing, the music. Like, I really feel like everybody was just brought their triple A game, you know?
You know, I mean, and I don't want you to have to feel like you say, oh, Noah's my favorite, but you have such a long running collaboration with him now. And if you pay attention to the show, the stuff that Charpie and I watch too, and you just look at half the team behind the show too. Dana gets all his help in the cinematography and directing, and now his daughter's working on the show. And it's just like, it must be super incredible to have such a strong team of people who seemingly like to continue to come together. You know, it's like trying to keep a band together. It's hard.
It's hard. And obviously scheduling too, you know, it's difficult because, you know, it's been 10 years and we've made 5 shows. We've 5 seasons. So it's like kind of every other year that we come back to it. But what I would say is, you know, if it's not broken, don't fix it. There's no real need to change it because it's really working the way the story is told.
Mm-hmm.
You know, a lot goes on behind the scenes that nobody ever sees. A lot goes on, and there's ups and downs, and all of a sudden, oh my God, that's not working. How are we going to fix that? And it's that goes for every production and every thing that you do. So it's interesting that we pull it off. Time and time again, like I feel like we pull it off. And I think this year we pulled it off even better than we have before.
I agree completely. This year was something special. I'm also like directly in line with you on your opinion on all of the rest of the season. Season 2 for me was really something special. I do like them all. I do feel like season 4 was underappreciated. It could have been just the world in general, like what was going on. Who knows? But it was a fantastic season. And season 5, absolutely, you guys knocked it out of the park. It was just so fun to be a part of.
Yeah. Like we almost feel like we're part of the team in the universe.
One of my favorite things on this season was, you've always create themes around characters, right? And one of the first ones I noticed was these sort of like breathy strings, these like growls whenever Ole is shown on screen. That was one of the first themes we talked about on the podcast. And I kind of want to get your take on how that came about. I mean, obviously he's this sort of big out of this world character. What was the brainstorming process like in figuring out his sound?
You know, Noah wanted it to sound like outside of the show, right? He wanted it to sound like something that we hadn't heard before in our show. So I kind of wanted to figure out what that meant. I didn't really know what that meant. Part of the storytelling is horrific. I sort of went deep into horror movie music, you know?
Okay.
And as I was messing around with a synthesizer, it was like, well, how does this sort of relate? I needed it to not be completely unrelated. So it was like trying to figure out how to relate something that's outside of our vernacular to our vernacular. And so what I came up with was, you know, how do I take something that would melodically work and put it on some sound that is not from our show, which is when I sort of went to the more synthetic thing. That was really part of the brainstorming process, you know, and then I wrote that theme seeing an original opening of the show, which is not how we open the show anymore. You know, episode 1's opening, there were a few different versions of that and what that was going to look like and what that was going to be. And one iteration of it started with him. And it was an interesting experiment. And I think Noah always knew that wasn't going to stick. But it definitely prompted me to really look into that thematic material. And that's sort of when I began my sojourn into writing for Munch. When I was writing the original themes, the first themes, all the themes I wrote at the beginning were all about Dot. And then I moved from Dot to Lorraine. And then from Lorraine, I wrote stuff for John Hamm's character. And in that, I found that I had to let go of all of those in order to find Munch, because Munch was just so different.
Yeah.
When Charpie pointed it out to me and brought it up, generally when I watch the show the first time, I'm planted in front of my TV and I've got an okay thing. And then maybe the second time I've got headphones on. So you start to hear just sort of the depth of some of your score, and it's really fun. And he picked up on that. And the closest, you're right, it was a little otherworldly comparatively. And the closest thing I thought it came to that it reminded me of when I was able to just listen back and really tune in was like in Breaking Bad, in the cousins. Every time those two cousins appeared on that show, there was just that same like that draggy low drone that just you kind of can't put your finger on it, but you know it makes you feel like weirdly uneasy.
Well, I mean, that was sort of also the idea here was how do I make it just feel all the unease? Because you just don't know what's happening with that person.
Yeah. He's the mystery of the season, sort of, isn't he?
Yeah. I don't know that we ever really figured out. We don't.
He's like a walking UFO.
Yeah. Well said.
Can we talk about tennis?
Sure.
We have a real penchant for like probably going too far with every episode watch and breakdown. Like we pause, we look at shit in the background. I mean, I spent an inordinate amount of time trying to figure out what tennis match that was in like episode 2 or 3. I'm sorry, I'm forgetting. And then we noticed that it came back in the episode Linda. And then when we eventually look at the score, and there's an actual tennis and drums. And of course, Charpie and I get really excited anytime anything comes back to numbers and wrench, because we still love those, that percussion. And I know you guys worked with was it USC Drum Corps for that?
Well, in season 2, I worked with the drum corps from USC.
Yeah.
The original piece of music was written with me playing the drums. Like I wrote it and played it. And then there was I had it where it was me and another drummer playing, and then I moved it over to the drum line, and then it became more of a percussion, orchestral percussion version. Mm-hmm. And then there's always me sitting on a drum kit and playing, and that's where that sort of came from. Dot's daughter plays drums in the show, so we were trying to sort of merge the two together.
Yeah. The thing we noticed too, when I brought up, and we had kind of a little bit of a breakdown on our show of us, trying to read our own tea leaves, but we noticed that this tennis back and forth noise was also very mimicked in the sound effects. And I don't know to what level you're involved of like the knocking and hitting of the marionette puppets. And there was just a lot of like back and forth. And I mean, can you give us any insight into the tennis, or is that supposed to be a secret, or are we crazy? Charpie and I are crazy because we were talking about it being the back and forth of characters and things.
For me, it started because I was scoring a scene where in the house, she's watching a tennis match, and you hear the back and forth of the tennis match. And then in the scene, we cut to Dot's kid playing drums, and it all sort of merged together. And that sort of gave me the idea, like, that sound of watching a tennis match is very hypnotic. So why can't I use that as a way to sort of hypnotize the audience and use that in the score? And then I did. And I used that in 2 ways. I actually used the sound of the tennis match, and then also used the sound of, and this is, this might be getting a little too into the weeds, but I found sounds of bones hit together, and I used that as a lot of percussion. So when you hear that,
that's
bones hitting each other. And that really began in Munch's theme. But then I sort of expanded it to use pretty much everywhere, because it worked so well.
Yeah.
You can get into the weeds with us anytime.
Never worry about the weeds with us. You'll never get deeper than we were. Thinking about that too, I have a quick question too about, like, you're working up these character themes. I noticed in some of season 5 with Dot too, that you had like these mixing bowl whisking noises that came into her.
Yeah. I mean, such a big part of the show is her wanting to make pancakes, and wanting to make stuff basically with Bisquick, right? Yeah. So, I was like, oh, well, I recorded the sound of me whisking eggs, and I used that in her theme, and that comes in and out of the whole score throughout the whole show.
I love that you're using these things that are just also, you talk about the bones or the whisking and the mixing. It's so interesting, because I know like a few seasons ago you were I read about you talking about like, yeah, they let me do a whole thing with wood blocks.
Yeah. Season 3, we did a whole thing with wood blocks. And, really what I try to do every season is I try to use sounds from within the show that can be evocative in the score. In season 1, it was the washer and dryer. It was the washing machine.
Yeah.
So that was really, in season 2, I used the sound of a typewriter. And in season 3, I used the wood blocks. In season 4, there was the sound of credit card machines and vending machines. And in season 3, I also used the sound of cars, car doors, and windshield wipers. It's all about trying to insert the sounds of the story into the score, as opposed to trying to just insert the score into the story. So that's sort of the idea that I try to enter every season with.
I really love that you do that, because if you watch the show and then listen to the soundtrack, as many of us do, you can see it. When you hear those sounds, it all comes rushing back in, and it creates a much more dynamic experience just listening to the soundtrack.
And, the interesting part of that is, as I'm writing that score, I'm seeing it before I see it, right? Because I write all that stuff. A lot of that material gets written before I ever see picture. So in that, I try to have the story affects the music, but the music also affects how we're telling the story. So, which is why I like to create the music early. So then Noah gets an idea of what I'm thinking. I get those scripts, so I get an idea of what he's thinking. And how does that come together to create something that's bigger than the sum of its own parts? That's really how I think stories need to be told, because the entire process of telling narrative stories in this way, television, film, stage, video games, it's all such a collaborative effort. If it's only like one person saying, this is what you're doing, this is how you're doing it, this is what you're doing, a lot of times what happens is you get lost in one point of view. And certainly what we need as collaborators in this type of storytelling is you need the main storyteller to have a very specific point of view to help guide, right? But, all of those things sort of come together to create something that's bigger than the whole of the original story. And that's, when you're really trying to make that work, it really does make sense to start so early. So you have an idea of what that end result is going to be.
We're kind of cherry picking a few pieces and songs here that, we had a pretty good joke early when you kind of cut to that scene of Gator in his bedroom and he's like trying to pump himself up. Is that kind of, that Fargo metal?
Yeah.
Was like, how do you get to a space like that? So you're sort of now out of that like orchestral scoring, and are you just like drawing all your power from your rock band days?
Yeah. I mean, that's like one of those things where Noah calls me and he's like, look, we've got this moment where we're going to shoot Gator, and he's going to be sitting in his room listening to some heavy metal. And they talked about like licensing Metallica or licensing something. And I was just like, let's not do that. I'll just write something and we'll see if that works. So I did. And yeah, that literally, I think that may have taken me all of 45 minutes to do. Right? Like, and I don't mean that as a humble brag.
Yeah.
I mean that like, that's me being able to just do all of the things that I've been doing my entire life. I was playing guitar, drums, bass, and that was the music that I'd listened to when I was 12, and I was like, oh, that'll be fun. And it was fun. Like, but there's nothing too deep about that. There's nothing too deep. Except for
you didn't have to go down the QAnon rabbit hole for that one.
I didn't have to go very far to be able to do that.
I think that's why we noticed it, and it was just so fun for us because it fit so well. It was just such a rock jock pump up sort of like right. Jock Jams 1992.
That's exactly what my inspiration was. Jock Jam.
Because of course I'm listening to the song and Charpie is like noticing his tattoo that says LOL and all these little things in the background, and we're just like, you go back and watch it the second time, you're like, fuck, this music just works. For whatever it's worth, what you were saying about you wrote it in like 45 minutes. Maggie did tell us one time, season 2, when we were on with you and you had to like check out for a second. She's like, he works really fast. Yeah. But we also had that discussion, and Charpie and I both work in creative, and we say, just because you come up with an idea fast doesn't mean it was easy. You spent 30 years figuring out how to do what you do,
yeah,
right?
Of course. Yeah.
Even for people out there to just understand that it's like sometimes a good thing just freaking happens, and you just go with it and you're like, damn, nailed it.
And sometimes it takes weeks and days and hours.
Or you work forever on it and then you end up throwing the whole thing in the garbage sometimes too. You're like, nope, doesn't work. I've done it,
Yeah, that happens.
As I listened, to the score all on its own, it's always fun to hear it on their own and just like reference back after you've seen the show. And it was fantastic. But when you get towards the end of that list with Fargo Metal and Tennis but Strip Club, I also feel like I want to just ask about Strip Club because I listened to that all on its own and I literally was transported to like the Lords of Acid for some reason.
That's funny. It's interesting. Like that was another one of those things where we needed a piece of music that needed to play in the background when the dude is at the strip club, and the different ones we were trying to license, they just weren't working narratively. And I was like, why don't I just try to write something that's going to work narratively as well? Like it'll have some relationship to what's happening as opposed to just figuring out like finding a piece of music. So, again, that's another one of those things where I watched the scene and then just wrote a piece of music pretty quickly because I just sort of understood like where did it need to dip down, where did it need to come up, and how does it need to feel, and what would you hear in a strip club at that time in 2019, because I don't know what you'd hear in a strip club in 2019. So, when it works, it works.
Yeah.
And I get a phone call from Noah asking for that kind of stuff a lot. When I did an arrangement of Simple Gifts, which is in episode 2.
Mm-hmm.
Episode 2? Maybe episode 5?
Yeah, it was episode 2.
Episode 2. I was like, yeah, I'd love to do an arrangement of that, traditional thing. And if I had to write some new lyrics because it needed to be extended. But that was fun too, get a choir in and do something like that. A lot of times for me, the fun that I get to have in Fargo is not just about writing the storytelling music, but to sometimes do something fun like a metal tune or, a strip club song or a Christian hymn,
Yeah. I will fact check us. That was episode 3. I don't want to, I will get, Jeff, I will get emails if I didn't correct that.
Right.
So I'll be like, you're wrong.
Sometimes I forget like what episode things are because it's like they move around. We move stuff around. It's like that strip club scene might have originally been in episode 4, but then ended up in episode 5, because in editing, they just move stuff around.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we've got to let you get back to your 47 other projects. Yeah. Real quick, will you be working on Aliens?
I've already started.
Yes. And will there be a Fargo season 6?
That is an unanswerable question for me.
Okay.
Like, I think that what Noah always says to me is if there's a story to tell, there's no reason why he wouldn't. Right. And I think that for him, if he comes up with something that he thinks would be a good story to tell in that world, I think he'd want to do it,
Amazing.
And thank God they let us do that, right?
Yeah,
like,
no kidding.
That the people on high say, yeah, go ahead, tell that story. Here's some money. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
like,
FX is great at that.
Yeah, they are. And they're very, apparently they're great partners. I don't really know what goes on at that level. I'm way farther down the line from that. But I'm always in awe that they keep saying to me like, yeah, let's do that again.
Amazing.
Yeah.
I actually forgot one question that I was curious about. And it was one of those moments in episode 10 where something felt familiar for me. And so of course you have to sort of like in mid show, you like Shazam it. And you brought back the orchestra for Nikki during the final episode. And it was sort of that as we're leading into that tunnel and there is the twist of the camera. And it carried all the way out, sort of the rabbit hole. Was there an intention behind that you can kind of tell us about? Or was it just like, fucking sounds good?
Yes. We've used that piece of music in a number of places. Mm-hmm. And there's a finality to it. And all at the same time, not only is there a finality, but there is something very uneasy and yet very beautiful about it to us.
Yeah.
So in thinking about what we were going to use there, I had written a piece of music that it just didn't get there. to the point that piece of music does. And that we've run into that a few times where it's like, we're not trying to cross the streams. We're not trying to deliberately connect anything, but what we are trying to connect is the feeling that you get in a situation like that. Mm-hmm. And that piece of music really did, it brings me right there, and it brings Noah right there. So that's why we have brought that piece of music back. There are a number of things. It's just like bringing wrench and numbers back in different ways too. So in the end, what I did was I did a sort of imagining of what that piece of music is, and then reworked it into that part of the show.
Oh, that's awesome. Because I mean, even when you talk about writing for characters over the course of these shows, I mean, Nikki Swango was such a, I don't know, she was just so fantastic to watch. Mary Elizabeth Winstead. Yeah. The only role I got super sad about super fast was, I've said it on our show before, was like, Scoot McNairy, you were barely in here. I'm sorry about that air conditioner, but I've loved him on so many other shows. But that's the Fargo world. They're going to die, and you're going to be like, what the fuck was that?
You always start, whenever I start reading that first script, I always ask the question, who's going to be the one? Who's going to be the one? Because there's always at least one person who you just don't want to die, who will always. Yep. And, I didn't know what was going to happen in this one until I got to see it, until I was reading the script for episode 10, because I always tell Noah, I was like, don't ever tell me what's happening. I want to read it or I want to see it. So I always ask that question, and I asked that question in one, and I didn't know. I didn't know.
How did you feel overall when you get to that point, that just giant smile and that Bisquick moment at the end? I mean, there are so many people that have written to us and talked to us about how satisfying it is. And I think ending any season of any show is an immaculately hard thing to do, because it's the internet age and no one's happy. Everyone's freaking angry about shit. It was so satisfying. It
is the thing I love about how we tell this Fargo story, is that every season has a beginning, middle, and an end. So, the thing that I don't like necessarily as much about episodic television as I do in the limited series world is that in episodic television, you have to try to continue the story, of the characters. It's one of the hardest things that I deal with in Star Trek. It's like having to figure out, like, how do I tell this story with these characters continually? And, which is why, even though I don't want a show to end, when they do end it satisfactorily, I feel fulfilled. And I'm like, okay, good. I want to move on. I want the story to have something to say, and then, okay, we've said it. And that's the thing that I love so much about Fargo and the way we tell the Fargo story. And what was particularly interesting about how we ended this season, which was kind of, I feel like it had a lot more of the same ethos in terms of how we felt at the end as we did in season 1, which is, we have that moving camera inside of the house in season 1. Mm-hmm. It gave me the same feeling. They weren't similar stories or even similarly told stories, but what it felt like at the end of season 1 and what it felt like at the end of season 5 was very similar,
Absolutely.
Last question. Charpie's like, what could you possibly have to ask now?
The man's got to go.
Do you eat biscuits with your chili?
I love biscuits with my chili. I do.
You do?
I love biscuits. Biscuits are a comfort food for me. Always have been.
That's been our topic of a few things is, what do you do with yours? Like cornbread or Fritos or up here, if you got a bowl of chili at a restaurant, it would just come with a side of like 2 saltine crackers or some that kind of thing. By the way,
all of those things are great. Cornbread.
Sure. Yes, absolutely. As much as we love your music and we appreciate you, we mostly needed to know.
That's the stuff you really want to know. I get it.
We need to know that the Russo household, you got chili, the Bisquick does just make its way out of the cupboard.
Yeah. It does.
Jeff, it's your third appearance on this show. You're officially a friend of the show. So
I feel very connected to you guys.
We'll get you a jacket. Anything you want to plug right now for our millions and millions of listeners?
People should watch Ripley. Ripley is that Steve Zaillian show that I did.
Yep.
I mean, it'll be on Netflix in April, and it's really great. It's it's the story of the talented Mr. Ripley, and it's dark, but it's great.
Yeah, I'm really excited to see Andrew Scott in that.
He's great.
I'm excited to see the show, excited to hear what you do with it. And we really can't thank you enough for taking time out of your day. And thank you very much to your team as well for getting back to us at Rhapsody. And it's just fantastic. We're glad you could take the time to speak with us today.
Thanks a lot, Jeff. We'll see you in 10 years.
Thank you very much.
All right. Great chat with Jeff Russo. Always a pleasure to talk to that guy. That was so fun. We got some really good insight into his process, into other projects. What'd you think, Bill?
So fun to be able to chat with him and hear about how things are going on. I'm so sure that people tuning in are probably wondering, why didn't you ask this? Why don't you do that? But it was hard. There's just so much to cover that we kind of had to pick and choose and cherry pick some things.
We've easily got 3 to 4 hours of things we want to ask about, but these are busy folks. I mean, Jeff's got like 16 projects right now.
It's insane.
I don't know how you keep them all straight, and I don't know how you keep them sounding different, when you're working on multiple different projects at the same time. It's very impressive.
I think it's incredibly impressive. I think it also is probably just an incredible testament to Jeff's professionalism and his ability to just get to the heart of things. God, you look at his breadth of work. If you go to IMDb and look up Jeff Russo, you're going to be like, what the hell? How? When does he sleep? What's he do?
Yeah, and what's crazy is we started talking to him kind of at the beginning of this part of his career, and it's been 10 years now, and it's really exploded, the amount of stuff he's been up to.
Yeah.
So that's a pretty cool thing for us, I think.
Yeah, I feel in the podcast, you were even like, we're on the team. We feel like it because I even remember watching like For All Mankind when it first came out, and I saw his name in the credits, and I was like, it's like the Will Ferrell moment. You're like, Santa, I know him. I feel like that when I see Jeff's name in the credits of a multitude of shows I've watched since 2014.
Yeah, one that I didn't even realize was Waco, which I loved that miniseries, and I had no idea he was a part of that. Sure enough, he was the composer.
Okay, so here, as we close out our episode for our Fargo, because we get, we have been still getting like, what other show are you two going to do? And I was like, until you can get a hold of Charpie, we're going to, Fargo Talks Fargo is our show. Let's do I'm putting you on the spot here. Like, do you have a favorite Jeff Russo you should go listen to thing? Like, is Waco yours? Like, I didn't see that yet.
Oh, Waco is excellent. Yeah. Really good. And then there's a follow-up show after that.
Okay. That's your recommendation
no, that's not my recommendation. I mean, I really liked Altered Carbon. It was canceled after 2 seasons, which makes me sad. That was a good show. Let's go with yours.
Mine, if I was going to send somebody else to watch another fantastic show, it would be The Night Of, the TV mini, the 1 season show from HBO. If you get a chance to go watch that, I would highly recommend it. It's also another show that he worked on, as he mentions in the podcast you just listened to, with Steve Zaillian. Riz Ahmed is amazing in it. And this is partially, I'm giving it the Fargo Talks Fargo Coen Brothers connection. It also stars none other than John Turturro. So there's even a connection to the sort of Fargo Coen Brothers universe there. Altered Carbon was good. And that, you know what? Small World, also a connection from that show to one of his other shows.
For All Mankind.
Joel Kinnaman is in both of those shows. So there, we hooked people up with a couple. If you want to listen to the awesomeness that is Jeff Russo, go check out those two series. There's plenty to be out there. And he said Ripley coming up, so stay tuned for that. Well, Charpie, until... should we hang it up one more time until somebody else emails us back and we maybe pop out another special episode?
Absolutely. Stay subscribed.
All right, Charpie. Thanks, bud.
Smash that like.
Smash that like. What is this, YouTube? All right, man. We'll talk to you later.
All right. Later. Bye now.